Hello, 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 dear listener. This is Danny Ceballos with the Unleashed Consulting Best Boss podcast. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Today's guest and interview is somebody that I have been working with now for a little bit in a bunch of different ways. Really was drawn and fascinated to the work that Suzanne Jabour does and became even more and more interested and fascinated with it the more I got to know her and her work because it's affecting me personally in so many different ways. So, dear listener, I hope this is the same effect for you because it really is transformational and radically transformational work that Suzanne is doing at the individual level and at the organizational level. So, Suzanne, can I just get your voice in the room? Welcome, welcome, welcome. So glad to have you here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I'm just thrilled with, really with all the work we've been doing together. And to get to come talk with you on this sort of bigger space is just awesome. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And just so y'all know, in case you haven't seen the title, our title today and our topic is Navigating Loss with Suzanne Jabour. So Suzanne is based in Canada. She'll tell you a little bit more about herself in a moment, but she is a grief educator. She's a grief educator in the grandest sense of the word, not only for people individually and in this kind of thing, but literally she comes into organizations, works with organizations with their leadership, with their staff, with their employees around. And Suzanne, I hope this is fair, not only dealing with grief
Mm-hmm.
as it shows up, and grief, you're going to define grief for us because we know it's a lot bigger than just,
Mm-hmm.
kind of the typical way, but also anticipating grief, which is something I'm really fascinated by, and working to better scaffold around what's inevitable and to, not only at the personal level, but at the organizational effectiveness level. So, Suzanne, welcome. Is there anything else that you want to tell us about the work that you do and an introduction to yourself before we get into some Q&A?
Yeah. Oh boy, so much.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I think what I want to always say first is, if you haven't skipped past the episode because of the title, I'm here to promise you that if you know Danny, kind of my flavor is very similar. This is not going to be heavy and morbid and sad. It's really aimed at the education piece, which is so critical because from my perspective, what holds us back in times of grief is a lot of fear. And one of the ways we can counteract fear is with education. If we understand things better, they're less scary, they're less intimidating, we get less kind of tangled up in worry. And we can really use that education. Excuse me, it's very early morning where I am. We can use that education to really feel a little bit more confident, to feel a little bit more comfortable being uncomfortable, which we have to be when we're learning new things. And the other thing I think is so important is for people to understand that when it comes to talking about grief, and as Danny and I are talking and you're learning and you're thinking, oh, I did not do that right, if there is a right and wrong, which there really isn't, it's a no shame, no blame conversation. As a collective, as a culture, a society, we have this taboo and this silence and this shared fear around death and dying and grief and grieving. So, whatever skills you realize in this conversation you haven't fully developed, or you don't have, or you haven't stepped up the way you wished you had, we have to hold that with curiosity and without shame and blame. Because when we're in shame and blame, we can't learn. And what we really need to do around this topic is learn. So if you sense as we're talking, oh my gosh, like that makes so much sense. And why didn't I know that before? You just didn't know it before, right? We need to learn together. And, bless Maya Angelou, as we know better, we do better, right? So I'm here just to help you know better and do better and not to worry about, what you may feel like you didn't do as well as you would have liked in the past when you didn't know any better, right? We have to look at that and go, well, I did the best I knew how. That's always good enough. And we can always make amends, right? There's always the opportunity to have a do-over. And I love talking to leaders who then say, oh, I didn't, that happened the last year or the last 2 years, however long ago. And I always say to them, you can go back to that person. Why wouldn't you go back to them and say, oh my gosh, I was talking to this person or I was listening to this podcast. And now that I know what I could have done, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. And what can I do for you now?
Yes, I
Right?
love it. Yeah, love
We
that.
can always go back with our honesty, with our vulnerability, with our, real life, knowledge and experience and say, oh, I look back and I think, oh my gosh, did I ever drop the ball? I hope I can mitigate any harm that I did. And, I'm so thrilled you stuck out my inability to really do what you needed. Why
Yeah.
not start there? So,
Yeah.
no shame, no blame. We're all here to learn. And really, we learn from talking to each other. So, one of the biggest issues around grief is that we don't talk to each other about it. So, if I don't share my story and my experience and you don't share yours, we've already missed an opportunity to learn. And we're not doing that. So my, overall big goal, big dream is that we would get to a place where we would talk about grief and loss in its broadest sense, the same way we talk about what we binge watched on the weekend, or, did you see this or what did you see that? And we do those comparisons of what we're watching because we want to learn from each other. I want to know, should I spend my time watching that? Do I usually agree with you? Do I usually disagree with you? Do I put it on my list just because you liked it? We learn so much from each other and we get to filter through other people's experiences. And we can do that with grief too.
It's so there's oh my God, there's so much that you just said that I want to, first of all, it's I want to underscore this notion and invitation to listeners, that the idea is to do the best you can do with what you have, with where you are right now. And once we recognize that we've done that, our parents have done that, people, if they're in their integrity, they're doing the best they can. And I bet we all were, even if we look back and think I could have done that differently. To your point, it doesn't serve us, but it's what we do now. And then the other thing that you said that was around, it strikes me that we, how hard it is to do it by ourselves. Like you said, like I come together, I tell you what I watched on Netflix because I want to be in community with you too.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's not just to show off that I watched, that I
Yeah.
spent three. It's
Look at
like,
all
well,
this
what
spare time I had to sit in front of the television.
want to connect with you around your binging or whatever. So, it does, for me, it suggests the question, how do I invite people to talk about grief? And when I'm still figuring out how I talk about grief, that's the first question. And then, of course, the big question is, what does this have to do with workplaces? That was one of my first, when I first was introduced to you, I'm like, I'm not sure I have a lot to connect with Suzanne. You're an organizational development consultant the way I am. You are coming in. But what is it? Yeah, tell me about how can leaders understand the importance of doing this work with their teams, with their organizations?
Yeah. So the first question, which was like, how can we start these conversations, is I think our gift comes from the broadening of the definition, right? If we
Mm,
really understand that
mm,
grief happens from all loss
mm,
and that
mhm.
all change brings loss. So if all change brings loss, all loss brings grief, we're actually experiencing grief all the time. So the gift in understanding that is we can practice, we can flex this new muscle, we can get more comfortable around the smaller losses, right?
Yeah,
Because someone like me, I
yeah.
come to this after the death of my son. So as a grieving mom grieving out loud, I'm not a good first assignment. I'm sure I was terrifying. And that's okay. I had to do what I had to do. Other people had to do what they had to do. It's all good. If we can practice around smaller losses, the loss of an opportunity, the loss of a job, the loss of
Yeah,
a
yeah.
relationship. There's so many around us that are big losses in our life, big ruptures that happen. We can practice there so that when it's a loss of a loved one, when it's one of the big ones, we've got a few sentences maybe that we've tried before, right? We've got a mindset we've tried before. We understand that when our heart is racing and we feel uncomfortable, it's okay, right? So that's one of the ways we can start to talk about it. And we can do that in organizations as well. So to kind of as a segue into why leaders should care, I want to talk about how you can start to talk about it in the workplace, and then we'll get to why we care. If we talk about a workplace, let's talk about a restructuring, right? That's a perfect example. That brings loss for the people who leave, for sure. Often organizations that are really thoughtful put a lot of care into the people that are being restructured out. We worry less about the people that got to stay, but they have a lot of grief. They have some sense that maybe someone who they thought was as good as or better than them left. So they might be concerned about that. They maybe lost their coffee room buddy. They lost their lunch mate. Even if they've gone to a new team, they've lost the people they're used to. There's lots of loss there and lots of grief. What if the first meeting after the restructure, we had a minute where we talked about that? And we just brought it into the room and acknowledged it instead of pretending that it's not happening, which is what so many of us are doing around emotional things. What
Mhm.
if the leader, because it has to come from the leader, no one is going to be more vulnerable or honest than the leader. So the leader needs to have some ability to say something like, you know, we've restructured and that's a big deal. And I have a whole lot of feelings about it. And I bet you do too. And it's okay for us to express those. So for me, I'm feeling really excited for what this restructure can bring to us, sad for the people that we had to let go, concerned about the people that are here. I want to make sure you feel comfortable. You know that we are valued to us. You know that this restructure really is overall for our best, possibility of a future, right? It's a future forward thinking
Yes.
decision. And if you have any feelings, let's just take a minute if you're comfortable, because we have to have safety first, right? No one's going to talk about this kind of stuff if they don't feel safe.
Yeah,
Can't make
exactly.
people do it, right? So you have to have developed a culture of safety, all those things. That's where we start in my programming, right? We need to start with leadership and the culture of safety, because if that's not there, it's pretty tough for us to keep going. But you could start that culture as a leader by saying, we launched that product. It didn't go the way we thought it was going to. Before we debrief and look at what our path forward is, I'm just going to share that I know you worked really hard. I'm really proud of us, even though it didn't go the way we thought, and I'm disappointed about that. I'm a little bit frustrated. I'm super sad. And does anybody else want to share how they're feeling about that? It's a minute, it's 2 minutes, and then we go on from there,
Mhm,
because we've
mhm,
brought it
mhm.
into the room. We've said it's okay to have feelings about it. Even if you don't want to talk about it, at least you're allowed to have them and they're welcome here, right? We don't
Mhm.
expect you to be an automaton anymore. That's not the modern workplace. We're
No,
no longer cogs in a machine, right? And the
that's right.
machines are getting smarter and smarter and smarter. So we need to be developing the human side, because the machine side is leaping ahead without us.
Yeah.
Why it matters is a bunch of different reasons. It matters because of how much it's costing you, right? The last study I could find really solid research about the cost, for those that look at sort of the bottom line aspect, was in 2003. So it's a while ago. And the grief index at that point calculated the cost of hidden grief in the workplace at $75 billion a year.
No kidding.
So
Wow.
just adjusted for inflation to 2023, it's 125 billion.
You
And
did
there
the
might
math.
have been this big rupture in our collective experience that makes that number probably too low, because there's way more grief around us now than there ever has been before. And we see it more. So, from a money perspective, it's costing you money, right? It's costing in productivity, it's costing in engagement and retention. We have this whole new idea of presenteeism. Never mind that people aren't showing up, they're showing up so disconnected. They're there, but they're not really there. So there's the financial cost. And then what's really most important to me, and I think to many leaders, is the human cost. Grievers are in our workplaces, right? Whether it's the loss of a loved one that we might know about because they might have accessed our bereavement leave policy. 3 to 5 days is the average. I'm here to tell you that's not enough for anybody. They're back when they're in acute grief. They're in survival mode and they're in your workplace.
Oh, yeah,
And
yeah.
if you don't know how to even acknowledge that loss in a healthy, appropriate way, you're already starting to lose them. And I hear from grievers all the time about how they've left their jobs. And if they stayed, how long it took for them to be re engaged. And if we can put into place some scaffolding, some understanding, some ability to even have that conversation, then we make that reintegration process smoother and quicker, and we keep them. Because
Yeah,
ultimately, we want to keep them. These are
that's
valued members of your team that are struggling in your workplace, and we don't even know it because we're so far behind in this knowledge and this conversation. We're not even having the conversation to find out.
really good business case. You made a compelling business case. Yeah, unmanaged grief is basically is a it's a talent drain, or can be a talent drain, and that's important. Yeah. So what would that look like then? What would that look like? In its simplest form. So I have I have somebody on my team that's coming back after just their few days of loss, and they're in there. What should I do? What should I do to? I mean, is it as easy as saying, "I hear you, I feel you, I see you. How you doing?"
Yeah, really, partly. That's absolutely a brilliant place to start, right? If we want to be more specific, one of the suggestions I always make is someone, either the direct supervisor, if that's a healthy relationship, or someone in leadership that they have a healthy, robust relationship with, needs to phone that person before they come back. And you need
Mm,
to smooth that return. Because
okay.
often what happens when a griever returns is one of
Mm,
two things is what I hear the most, which is so fascinating. And they're opposite ends of the spectrum. Either they show up and everyone bombards them with, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry, this is terrible,
yes.
whatever.
Yes.
Probably some of the old cliches and platitudes, which really I'm here to tell you, you should never say again because most of them are harmful. But they're bombarded and then they're overwhelmed. And then, like, you've lost them at hello, right? So, would they like you? First of all, the telling is impossibly difficult. When you have just lost someone and you have to keep telling people about your loss, it's unspeakably hard. Could you tell everyone for them? Would that be helpful? Is a great question before they have come back. Can you tell everyone for them? Would they like for people to all who want to all acknowledge their loss immediately and then we get it over with? Or would they rather nobody says anything the first day or that people come over time to say something? Because what happens for grievers is either everyone comes and says something
Right.
or nobody says anything and the grief is never acknowledged. And both of those are problematic. So we need to find that kind of, middle ground, and it all needs to be led by the griever.
Yeah.
So we don't
Yeah.
get to decide anything for them because that's the other thing that I hear is even in organizations that are, with the best of intentions are saying, wow, let's take some tasks off your plate, which certainly is something you could offer. They're doing it without consultation. They're doing it without a plan to put those tasks back on. And often they're taking away the tasks the person really loves. So don't take away the thing they like the most, right? Take away the stuff that's peripheral and can easily be done by someone else. It all has to happen as a conversation. So it's that
Let me-
sense of,
Can I ask you something? Because
yeah,
you and I have had so many conversations about this great stuff, and one of the takeaways that I have from a previous conversation was the practicality and the usefulness of my not being the griever, the consoler. I don't know what to call myself, but the rest of the world, but to be directive with you as a griever and say, let me do this for you. So not so much in consultation, because it occurs to me, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are. I don't have the capacity if I'm in my intense grief to have that conversation that you want to have with me.
yeah,
Yeah. So what? I'm not sure what to
yeah.
do with that.
So the offers of support need to
Yeah.
be really practical.
Yes.
Right?
Okay.
Because the griever can't, and so that's why so many people with the best of
Yes.
intentions and the fullest of love say, oh my gosh, anything you need, give me a call.
Exactly.
Right? And supervisors and bosses will say, anything we can do for you, we 100% support you. That's brilliant. That's an excellent first sentence. But the problem for the griever, especially in that acute phase, in that survival mode phase, is that they can't conceptualize what might be helpful.
Right. Right. Right.
My brain is too busy. It's doing all kinds of other things. There's a brilliant book. They've done amazing research about what it's actually doing. It's too busy doing stuff to conceptualize that sort of big stuff about like what might be helpful. I don't know. I don't even know how I'm going to get through the day or the moment. So specific offers, and that's part of what I love doing with organizations is coming up with a policy, first of all. So this is all actually formalized somewhere and coming up with the best description I can come up with is it's a menu. It's a menu of supports that we can offer you. Which of these would be helpful to you this week? Do you
Mm-hmm.
need flex time, for example? Would that be
Mm-hmm.
helpful?
Mm-hmm.
Can we shift, if you're somewhere where there's a dress code, can we shift the dress code if that's possible?
Mm-hmm.
Can we, is there some tasks that we can offload from you at the moment, right? Just for now. And then
Mm-hmm.
you need a follow up plan, right? Some of the things we can do that are the most helpful are around the brain fog piece, right? One of the symptoms we don't talk about really at all, and I think especially in the workplace because we don't want our supervisors, our employers to feel like we're less capable, but the reality is we're less capable. Brain fog is a massive issue, and it really impacts people's ability to do multi-step tasks, for example, or remember deadlines. Those kinds of things are really hard. Like you have to do A and then B and then C to get to D. I used to be able to knock that stuff out of the park. No problem. Easy peasy. That's my sweet spot. And then when my son died, I would get to B and be there going, huh, I know there was something else I was supposed to do next. And I have no idea what it is. Like it's just gone. It's not there anymore. So if you can scaffold that, if you can, and it's so easy now with technology, there's no reason you can't have a shared document on a drive of some sort, someplace where that's all set out, where we're checking in and we're going, oh yeah, check box, I've done that. Great. What's next?
Mhm,
I can
mhm,
do that as a griever. I can go down a list.
mhm, mhm.
And that the spill off, and what's exciting about this work to me is the ripple effects are so beautiful. The ripple effect of supporting someone who's struggling with grief is that your team sees that you really care, that someone who's struggling is getting supported, and that then creates this culture of support, this culture of care,
Yes,
this culture of connection to what you were speaking about before, right? We're all
yes.
wanting to build connection. We want to
Yeah.
build connection so much we're talking about the direct we're watching on television. Like we are
Right,
craving connection, right?
right, right.
You're building that connection by saying, yeah, we care about you. What can we do as a group? To me, that's compassion.
Mhm,
Most of us
mhm,
have moved from sympathy, I'm sorry for you, to
mhm.
empathy, right? I'm trying to put myself in your shoes. We want to take the next step to compassion. Compassion to me is empathy in action.
Oh,
I'm
great.
doing
Yeah,
my best to understand what you might be going through. Now, how can I help? How can I carry that burden with you? What can I do to alleviate the burden? And that's where the specific offers come in.
I
The
love
other
that.
beauty of a policy is it gives the supervisor, the direct report, whoever needs to have this conversation, that feels awkward and uncomfortable, a little bit of fear. They don't want to do the wrong thing. They don't want to do harm. You're giving them a scaffold to be able to have that conversation. Here's this policy. Let's look at it together. Let's figure out what of it would be helpful to you right now. And then next week, let's talk about it again. Because I know, because I saw this, I listened to this great podcast with this amazing Danny Ceballos. I know that it's probably going to have changed by next week. So let's plan to chat again next Monday morning and see, do we need to shift anything? Because we have this robust means of supporting you. And we're here for as long as it takes, right? The studies have shown that productivity drops to about 70% for that first 6 months ish. And this is a continuum, right? It's back up to 90, which I think is, I don't think any of us are operating at 100. 90 is probably about as good as it gets by the
Period. Yeah.
first year, right?
Okay.
So we're going to need some high levels of support for about the first 3 to 6 months. The next 6 months, you're not likely going to need any support at all. And your productivity is going to build over time just as you get more reconnected. You're able to self regulate better. You're less overwhelmed by your own personal experience. So we're not talking about supporting people for a long time. And we're talking for the most part about things that are cost neutral or very low cost. Like we all have this software. We've all got a suite of software that will do everything I'm talking about. We all have someone on the team that cares enough to take on a little bit of an extra load for the short term. We're surrounded by people who want to help us. They just don't know how. So if the organization puts together the how, people will step in.
I love that. Yeah. Yeah. My takeaway from all that is, that the griever may not be able to identify what they want or need, but when I have some agency and you give me choices, there's a little bit of control that I have there a little bit. So I love that. Suzanne, do you have, or is there a place where folks can look at a sample grief in the workplace policy? Because everything you said
Oh,
is
that would
so,
be a good thing for me to like cobble
yeah,
together. I don't actually have a sample. That's so funny. You're the first person that's asked me for that. I for sure could put that together. Check in about
That's
2 weeks, and it'll be on my website.
yeah, actually,
What
let's.
you will find on my website is a really great little ebook. It's about 6 pages or 8 pages. I don't remember. It's very short. And what it looks at is, which we have, so many things we haven't touched on today because you and I could talk about this forever. And I know people don't want to listen forever. But what it touches on is a couple things. Some of the things are the symptoms that we need to understand. So we've talked a little bit about brain fog. People's relationship with time gets disrupted. Their whole physiology gets disrupted. People are in physical pain, like actual physical pain. Their digestion is a mess. They don't understand how to feed themselves. Like there's so many things we can help people with. So there's a breakdown of some of the really common symptoms. And also because so many times people are grieving and we don't even know,
Yeah.
right? Because if you're not grieving a relationship that fits that bereavement policy, then we maybe don't even know what's happened. There's some things you can watch for. So what can you be watching for in your team that might be an indicator that they're grieving? So then you can have a messy, awkward conversation. It's okay. We're learning a new skill. It's going to be messy and awkward. We're going to make mistakes. It's all good. But you could say, wow, I'm really noticing that you're a little bit withdrawn. And I'm just curious if there's something going on that you want to talk about, or is there some way I can support you? I'm really noticing that, your engagement is different. I'm noticing that you're you're usually so on top of everything, and I'm feeling that, things are slipping a little bit for you and you're struggling a little bit with deadlines. What can I do to support you? Would it be helpful if we broke this all down together and we documented it somewhere? Like, we can offer support without knowing the nitty-gritty of someone's story too, which is really important, because I was a grieving when I'm grieving out loud. I would tell anybody whatever was happening for me in that moment. That's not the norm. Most people, I think, because of our cultural expectations, grieve much more privately
Yeah.
because they know
Right.
they're making people uncomfortable. I didn't
Right.
care. For my survival, I had to just let it all out, or I was going to literally shatter like a piece of crystal when the opera singer sings. It was that critical for me. But most people aren't going to make that choice. They're going to be somewhere in between complete silence and complete, brain dumping onto whoever would listen. So you might not even know, and they might not want to share the details of the story. That actually doesn't matter. What matters is that we show up and say, wow, I noticed that you're maybe struggling a little bit. You don't have to tell me everything that's going on. If you want to, I'm a safe place to do that. What's most important is you need to know that I care. And is there something I can do to help? Would it help if I did X and offer something? And if they say no, that's okay. They get to say yes or no. The
Mhm.
first no doesn't mean never offer again,
Mhm.
right? Offer something different a few days later. If you see something else happening, say, oh, I think it would be really, and you could take it on yourself, right? Part of it is we don't want to be a burden. We all have that
Right.
concept of like not wanting to put people out. What
Right.
if you said, as the team leader of this project, what would really help me know that we're all on the same page? How about if we all take an hour and we break down all of our needs, all the things we need to do, put them in chronological order, and let's merge that into one big document so we all have it? Because the ripple that I was talking about before, besides cultural, is all of that stuff that we're all spending part of our intellect and our brain worrying about. Oh, the meeting's at 2. What do I need to get done for that meeting? We can take all of that out of people's heads. If
Mhm.
I
Mm.
know my computer's going to bing 10 minutes before the meeting because we've set up a shared reminder on our shared calendar, as a functioning, normal, successfully contributing person, I don't need to worry about that. So now my mind and my capacity is freed up, because what we're really hiring people for is usually their creativity, their innovation, their ability to think outside the box, to put things together in a unique way. We're not hiring them to remember the meetings at 2 o'clock.
Right. Yeah. Really good
So
point.
let's take all, like, if we take a bunch of that stuff out of
Yeah.
the thing for everyone,
Really good point.
everybody's working at a different level, and we're supporting the person who's struggling, whether
Mhm.
it's from grief, whether it's for something else, whether it's for grief that they don't even know is grief, because most of
Mhm.
the time we're grieving and we're not even calling it that, right?
Mhm.
Organizations are talking about stress and burnout all the time.
Mhm.
What if
Mhm.
what's really going on is that we're grieving and we don't even know how to say that?
Yeah. Really interesting reframe. Really great reframe. Suzanne, we're coming up on the half hour, and I make a commitment to keep these at half hour. I'm gonna offline invite you to do a part two to this, and I really
Yeah.
hope that we'll be able to do that. I do feel like there's a lot more to discuss here, and we're talking about so much more, not more than grief, but grief is, I mean, the repercussions of this conversation are so much more about grief.
Yeah.
About team building, about organizational effectiveness, about retention of talent, about distinguishing yourself as an employer of choice with this.
Yes.
There's so many good things that are really helpful from the organizational perspective. So we're going to wrap up, but before we do that, I'm wondering a couple of things. What is one thing that you would recommend folks do right after they listen to this podcast if they want to continue on this journey? Is there a book, a resource, Also, and maybe this is it, how can folks best get in touch with you? What can they find on your website? Yeah, and if there's any other parting kinds of things that you'd like to say, would love to hear.
Yeah. I mean, the best place to find me is on the website. It's SuzanneJabour.com. I couldn't make it simpler unless my last name was easy to spell, but it's SuzanneJabour.com. You can find the ebook there. There's all kinds of information about everything that I'm up to. And if you love podcasts and you want to listen to more of me talking about this stuff, if you go to SuzanneJabour.com/podcasts, I've actually put together, just for podcast listeners, a curated, my sort of top 10 favorite episodes. So, because I know if you love audio, you don't really want to go read my ebook. So go listen to more audio. It's right there at the podcast list.
That's awesome. That is awesome. I didn't know that. I'm going to have to check that out. Great, Suzanne. Well, thank you so much. This has been really wonderful. And again, I feel like we just scratched the surface. So I appreciate it so much. And dear listener, I do hope you'll get into Suzanne's world. Go to her website, check out the ebook, check out the podcast, get on her list. She is amazing. Suzanne, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure.
Thanks so much for having me, Danny.
You bet. And dear listener, thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Best Boss Podcast. We look forward to connecting with you next time. Take good care. Bye, y'all.